those that are new first time or we're not here for the very first class, for class 1, I wanted to reiterate that what we're doing in here. We're not really just covering Isaiah. We're not covering Isaiah just to be covering Isaiah. I will be skipping parts of it. I am using Isaiah to teach Revelation. That's what we're doing. I know somebody came up after class last week and was like, you know, this has to do, there's dual fulfillment of some of these things, and he's talking to the people of his time and all that. And I'm like, yeah, we agree with that. We don't have any problem with that. I'm going to use that as an example many times, but that's not the type of stuff that I'm trying to cover. I'm trying to just show the parts that are connected to the book of Revelation to help you be able to understand the metaphors and the symbols that you will find in that book.
Do your disclaimer.
Which one?
You don't have to agree. You don't. And you're not the final word on.
I am definitely not an authority, and I have learned stuff over the years. I've been studying this for a very long time, and I've changed my mind on many things. So just because I say it here does not mean it's gospel truth. I'm not inspired. It's not. I'm doing my best, but it's not my job to be 100% accurate. It's your job to take the stuff and go study it for yourself, to prove that what I'm saying or not saying or whatever. And I will learn. I've had many people come up or text me or whatever and point stuff out. I'm like, oh, that's a great, like Tom's mountain thing. I'm like, ooh, I think I've been missing that. I'm going to be adding that in. Okay, so I am not infallible. So yeah, I'm not inspired. I can and will mess up. I think I said on day 1, the only thing I can guarantee you is that I will not be 100% accurate. Some of these things I will mess up. I'm not trying to. I just haven't worked it out yet.
Thanks.
I do feel I'm a lot more accurate today than I was 25 years ago. Right? That's kind of how it goes. And hey, I was talking to Cody, right? I was talking to Cody about it a week or 2 ago. It's nice in that Revelation, believe how you want. It's not really gonna, we were kind of joking around. We're like, look, if it's a requirement to get to heaven, to understand the book of Revelation, there's gonna be like 3 people there. Right? It's like a crazy hard book with ambiguous metaphors tied in all throughout. So if you've got to understand that, we're all in trouble. So I hope that you take that knowing that there's not a lot of pressure on it. The way that I do it is, I think you can reach people with it. I think you can explain passages that are otherwise almost impossible to explain, like the new heavens and new earth type stuff. And I think those are easily explainable as we've gone through many times. That's kind of why I do it. I think you can reach people. I've reached a Mormon before, had them convert over. That this is what the world is interested in. It's an icebreaker, if nothing else. You can sound intelligent on it, show them some stuff. We had a conversation the other night. Tom and I were talking to a young woman, and she started talking about the Euphrates River drying up. And she's like, I think that's happening now. I was like, no, that's a reference to when Cyrus dries up the Euphrates to sneak into Babylon when Belshazzar's having his big party. She had no clue. She was highly interested in it, knew a bunch of Revelation stuff, but she didn't understand a lot of the easier things in there that it's referencing. So anyway, that's kind of what we're doing. We kind of ended on the parable of the vineyard last week. And to show you, I'm going through these things, and I'm going through them to show you there's going to be like one little bit of piece of information that ties the ultimate target there in Revelation to Jerusalem. That's what I'm doing. So I'm going through this whole big old chapter to link it to a certain verse in Revelation. And I'll go through the next chapter and link it to like one verse. Some chapters, there's a whole bunch of links. The heavens and earth. There in Isaiah 1, 2, 9, and 10. That's Revelation 21:1. Very, very commonly misunderstood passage because everybody takes it literal. Right? So, what we learned in the parable of the vineyard last week was, and I did not stress it, and I go back and I kind of analyze how I did, and I'm like, I kind of halfway alluded to my point, but I never made my point. So I wanted to do that before we moved on. But we're talking, if I asked you what was the once faithful city that lost its candle, that was not faithful anymore, where Christ was crucified, that's constantly in the Bible called Sodom and Egypt, Sodom a lot more than Egypt, we'll get to Egypt, that would be thrown into the sea like the fruitless fig tree that it was, and sea meaning Gentiles, be given to the Gentiles. I will take this kingdom and give it to the Gentiles. Those women would be saying to the rocks, fall on us, who was the vineyard who had a wine press. And that's what we were learning last week. Matthew 5 is saying, because he's directly quoting from Song of Solomon, hey, the vineyard, these are my people. And in the middle of it's going to be this wine press. Well, Revelation, the city about all of these things, about the destruction of Jerusalem here, the wine press is getting trodden down. It's just another way to connect the ultimate target of destruction there in Revelation to Jerusalem back in the first century. And then, of course, my favorite one is, all of this is going on while the harlot is wearing Aaron's high priest garments. That one's a lot of fun to me, and it's a lot of the way I discovered it. I told y'all that story. I was really excited, and nobody else in my congregation was excited. They just looked at me like, "Ghost story, bro, man, get away from me. You are annoying." That's what they were saying. So. Then I gradually introduced 2 Peter 3. We will get into this a lot more at some point. But this is another passage that you've always been taught is about the end of time. You've always been taught it. I was always taught it. The first time I ever taught anything to do with Revelation, I was in my young 20s, I think. Maybe not young, maybe mid-20s. And I was teaching a high school class on Revelation. I was teaching Revelation 21. And I told the class, look, I've been here, I've been in Stephenville, I've been to Killeen, I've been all these different places. Every single time I've heard a sermon on 2 Peter 3, the preacher will skip verse 13. They'll go through it, they'll talk about 10, they'll talk about 12, and then they'll skip 13. And we left the classroom, and we went and sat in the auditorium, and the preacher goes, all right, today we're going to be studying 2 Peter 3. And I was like, oh no, I am in trouble. I'm in trouble, because I just predicted what he was going to do. This was a no-win situation for me. I was either right and in trouble, or I was wrong and in trouble. He reads verse 10, and I could tell all my high school kids were just actually paying attention. Why were they not? Oh yeah, there were no phones then, I guess. But I wish they weren't. But they were paying attention like crazy, which is unusual for high school kids. He reads 10 and says the normal stuff about it. He reads 11, he reads 12 and talks about it for a minute, and then he reads 14. And every single one of those kids looks back at me like, Stop it! He's afraid you're going to give me trouble. I'm not going to explain this today. You can read it for yourself and plug in the stuff we've been learning about the heavens and earth. Might make some sense to you. It'll be hard because you have to unlearn. It's way harder to unlearn than it is to learn. Right? Way harder. So you've been told, I'm 47. I've been told most of my life that passage about the end of time. It's real hard for me. There were passages in Revelation 21 where I would fight with my brother, my older brother, and I'd be like, no way, dude, there is no way. And it took me over a decade to unlearn something about it. It took me over a decade, and finally I could not make something in chapter 20. I couldn't reconcile it. He's like, okay, you ready for this? I was like, let me see it. He explained the chapter 20 part, and I was like, okay, you're right. Took me a decade to unlearn, to let go of what I had learned. It's hard. I don't envy you. I sympathize with that. It's hard. But what I'm connecting here is 2 Peter 3 is saying, there shall come in the last days, and remember when I say last days, I don't say of time. I say the last days of the Jewish dispensation, the last days of Judaism. And there shall come in the last days scoffers, saying, where is the promise of his coming? Isaiah 5 is talking about that. Isaiah 5 is the one prophet that he's talking about here. That ye may be mindful of the words which were spoken before by the holy prophets. This guy, Isaiah, that we've been studying, saying that in the last days they're going to be saying, where's God coming? Let him come so that we can. This is sarcasm from these guys. This is not a good thing. These are the wicked people saying this. These are the scoffers. Is God coming? Come on, let him come. Let him see it. If he's really coming, come on. They're like taunting. That's what they're doing. It's not a good thing. This is what Peter is referencing. He's referencing these scoffers. And Isaiah is talking about, if you go back through the first 5 chapters here, when the winepress would be trodden down, when the Gentiles would be able to be a part of the church. This is all first century event. When they would say, again, talking to Judah and Jerusalem, they would say to the rocks, fall upon us, hide us from your wrath. It's all connected. This here, in the last days of the Jews, they're going to be saying that. Well, Isaiah says the same thing. He says, these scoffers are going to say, where's the sign of your coming? Show us. You think it's happening? Show us. Not something I would do. And just connecting it back to Sodom, that verse in Revelation, chapter 11. Deuteronomy is talking about them being the bad vineyard that produced the bad fruits, right? In Isaiah 5, we've got the parable, the vineyard parable going on here. And he's saying, hey, I did everything for you. I gave you all these protections, I gave you everything, and you produced wild fruits. Not good. I'm going to destroy you. Well, Deuteronomy, Song of Moses, when they're coming out of Egypt there, I think at that time they're getting close to entering Promised Land, right? The end of Deuteronomy. He didn't get to go, but he's giving them this big final warning. And he's saying, hey, you vineyard, you constantly see the church, God's people as the vineyard. That should be ingrained in you. You're the vine of Sodom. That city, which is spiritually called Sodom. It's just nonstop. Jerusalem is called Sodom. Again, we get to Egypt later. Kind of touched it a little bit. We did not get to the parable of the tares last week, I think. I think I promised y'all that we were going to connect Malachi. Carolyn, you said you woke up connecting all those different books, right? Yeah. You raised your hand.
Oh, no, you did say we were going to talk about it.
But I didn't. I felt like I let you down.
No.
Because Because that's what you woke up in the morning wanting to do.
Sure.
Sounded like my wife there. Hey, you want to do it? Sure. That does not sound like a good idea. Sure. As the fire devoureth the stubble, and the flame consumeth the chaff, so their root shall be rottenness. And you should be thinking, what chapter in the New Testament? Don't look at my notes. Do I have it? Okay, it's not on this slide. What chapter? Not Matthew. Not anywhere in Matthew. What chapter does this sound like to y'all? The root shall be rottenness. The blossom shall go up as dust. Because they have cast away the law of the Lord of hosts, despised the word. Again, there's no question it's talking about the Jews here. But what chapter, what book?
I thought of Psalms 1.
Okay, that's Old Testament.
True.
I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong. That's not the one I'm looking for, but it's all over, not Revelation. The stubble part. The stubble part. I'm talking about the root. I'm talking about the root. The root being chopped off. It'd be Romans 11. When he's grafting in the branches and all of that. You know what I'm talking about now? That's the one. I think we get to it here. But they're not, getting back to this vineyard analogy, they're going to be bundled up and burned. They're not good. He's casting them into the sea. He's bundling them. He's laying them desolate. He's destroying them with fire. Matthew 13, talking about the good and the bad here, the Jews that converted over to Christianity and the ones that did not. And if we get far enough tonight, you'll see that you'll even see the word, those that converted. Gather ye first the tares, the bad ones, bind them in bundles to burn them. But gather the good ones, the wheat, the good fruit, the ones that produce the good fruit, gather them into my barn, into my house. And he explains, I couldn't do it sooner. I can't destroy the tares too soon because it would mess up the wheat. He's like, I've got to let them both kind of grow up together and then I'll separate them once the wheat is strong enough to survive it. Therefore, as the fire devoureth the stubble, and the flames consumeth the chaff, so their root shall be as rottenness. Matthew 3, but when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees that come to his baptism, he said, O generation of vipers, who hath warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Talking to the Jews, right? Not talking to the Romans, not talking to the Nazis, not talking to the Americans. Should be talking to the Americans. Now also is the axe laid to the root of the trees. Therefore every tree which bringeth forth not good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. It's the same thing. Isaiah is the Messianic prophet. He's ultimately predicting stuff in the first century. He's using what's going on in his time to illustrate it, because they weren't any better then. They were on again, off again, good. Hezekiah was a good one. Josiah was pretty much good. Ahaz, not so good. Jehoiakim, not so good. Some of the others, there were more bad than good, right? So he's using what's going on in their time, including the behavior of all of the faraway Gentile nations and their destructions, and comparing it to what's going to be happening to his own vineyard there in the first century. And we'll get to chapter 7 here in a minute, but he can't do it yet. There will be a sign. The sign has to happen first, and then it can happen. Anybody know what the sign is?
Is this all the destruction of Jerusalem? They had rebelled against God and Christ.
Right. So it's ultimately about their destruction in the first century, Isaiah. It was very applicable to them during Isaiah's time, because they kept straying. He's like, I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to throw you into Babylonian captivity. Literal, physical, literal Babylonian captivity, where Nebuchadnezzar comes in and carries them off. Assyria coming down and messing them up a lot. Egypt kept attacking them. Moab kept attacking them. But ultimately, and if you remember, like the second slide that we did, is the when. When is Isaiah really talking about? I'm trying to show to you that through all of the cross references, through the apostles saying, hey, you remember when Isaiah said this? It's now being fulfilled today. And we're going to get a lot of that today, actually. It ultimately has its fulfillment in the first century AD. It has this foreshadowing, precursor fulfillment back during Isaiah's time. Some yes, some no. But he's really getting them ready for the transition to Christianity, when they would be ultimately destroyed. And then you have the Malachi 4 verse. For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, all the proud and all that do wickedly shall be as the stubble. Our Malachi is not saying anything new. Malachi is a short version of the book of Isaiah. He doesn't come up with anything new. There's nothing in there that's new. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, said the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings. This is Christ. Does Christ arise when he comes out of Babylonian captivity? No, he's not there. I guess he could be there in spirit in a certain way, but he's literally there then, changing stuff up there in the first century when they make this transition from Judaism to Christianity. He tells them many times, Matthew 24, Luke 21, he's returning to deliver this judgment. He doesn't do it in person. He uses the Roman army, but that's what he's doing. Turn to Joel 2. I don't know how familiar y'all are with the book of Joel, but it's a couple of chapters on all of this stuff. And it's very nice in that it unquestionably, without a doubt, ties into Acts chapter 2. So this is one of those ones where it's not controversy. It can't be, because Acts quotes it and says, remember when Joel says this? It is now being fulfilled. It is right now being fulfilled. So you know what Joel's talking about. Isaiah talks about it too. He has this, his anger is not turned away. He's going to lift up a sign to the nations from afar. We've discussed this many times in here already. And he's going to hiss them. He's going to call them. They're going to come. They're going to be his tool. All right, Nebuchadnezzar. Do y'all remember Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4, chapter 5, Daniel? Where he's saying, oh, I'm great king. I'm awesome. I have done I've conquered the world. I'm the greatest king ever. God says, dude, you were my tool. I'm using you. Go play with the pigs for 7 years. And then Nebuchadnezzar does that. He doesn't have any control. And he's like, he comes out of that 7 years. He's like, oh, God is God. I was just his tool. That's what he's saying. I'm going to use the nations from afar to come and deliver this anger, the indignation, the wrath that he's bringing upon his own people. When you look at Joel, and Vanover, will you turn to Acts chapter 2? And somebody else have Joel 2 ready?
I'm a Joel 2.
Okay. Joel 2, if you read through it, they go into this captivity, just Babylonian, 16 through 21. Preferably King James or American Standard, or New American Standard.
Is ESV okay?
Pre-
English
I-
Standard?
I prefer not, but
Hang on. Hold on, I got all the versions.
I'm not familiar with that one as well.
I just had my other one bookmarked, so, okay, I'll move it for you.
Thank you.
Okay, am I reading
No,
first?
not yet, not yet. So, this Gentile army comes, puts the Jews into captivity. God has pity on them, 2:18, brings them out of it. He removes the Gentile army. But then he starts talking about doing it again in a more serious way. And when would it be fulfilled? Somebody read Joel 2:28. Tom, you said you got it?
Yeah.
28 through 32.
Verse 28, it will come about after this, that I will pour out my spirit on all mankind. All your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, your young men will see visions. Even on the male and female servants I will pour out my spirit in those days. Verse 30, I will display wonders in the sky and on the earth, blood, fire, and columns of smoke. Verse 31, the sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. Verse 32, and it will come about that whoever calls in the name of the Lord will be delivered. For on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be those who escape, as the Lord has said, even among the survivors whom the Lord calls.
So he's pouring out his spirit upon all flesh. Your mind should instantly go to quite possibly the most important chapter in the Bible. Right? Acts chapter 2,
How far do you want me to go?
16 through 21.
Okay.
Just so that it's not me saying it.
But this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel, and it shall come to pass in the last days, says God, that I will pour out of my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy, your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams, and on my men servants and my maid servants I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they shall prophesy. I will show wonders in heaven above the signs in the earth, above and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And it shall come to pass that whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved.
This was 800 years before Christ.
The Joel reference?
Yeah,
Joel.
not,
Yeah.
Yep. And who wrote Acts? Is it Luke? Yeah.
Yep.
What does Luke say?
This is the
It's being fulfilled right now. So when you read all of this weird apocalyptic stuff that Joel's talking about, it's not talking about the end of time. It's talking about the first century. It's talking about, what's my class about, guys? The transition from Judaism to Christianity. And we will eventually get back into heavens and earth, sun, moon, and stars again, because it's so important that you get that concept down. Those lights were going out. The new light was going to be the light thereof. The new sun. Christ did provide the light. Oh. And you know how he said the last days were in these last days? Like it's already going on there in the first century, because that's what I said. Last days is the first century. The last days of Judaism there, in those last days, he's going to bring this Gentile army from afar. Isaiah, Joel, Malachi, Zechariah, Zephaniah. Oh, we haven't done Zephaniah yet.
Do you think most people get confused on the last day?
For sure.
In other words, they That could be the end of time.
They think, like when I first learned it, I was told the last days of the earth.
Yeah, the end of the age or the last.
And it messes you up so much because you just, a lot of weird stuff starts
You
happening.
hear that preached all the time on TV and so forth. It's totally out of.
Yeah, the last days are already gone.
Yeah.
It's not the last, and that's what we talked about in the beginning is a lot of these theories center around ourselves. I'm going to make a theory and it's going to center around me. Although I'm not the center of the Bible. It's not the last days of anything that has to do with me. It's the last days to do with Judaism. You see it easily in Daniel. And I will tell you what will befall your people in their latter days. The latter days. It's debated. Take out this class, if I go downstairs and we start talking to all the biblical scholars of legacy, I might be the only one that says this. All the rest of them will possibly tell you. I don't know. I don't want to speak for them. I don't know what they know. But you find it everywhere. You find it everywhere. The last days means the last days of the earth. And it's not. It's talking about the last days of Daniel's people. Their latter end. All of this is pointing to it. That is the one of the big controversies, the end of the world thing. I think we've gotten away from the end of the world debate there in Matthew 24. I think all the people that said, see here it's saying when is the end of the world going to be? I think they've realized that's a losing argument. It's when is the end of the age going to be? And once you realize that mistranslation there in Matthew 24, it's much easier to start seeing this. The end of the Jewish age. The last days of the Jews. Because those apostles there in Matthew 24 are asking the same question. Tell us when these last days are going to be. When is the temple going to be thrown down? When is Judaism going to end? That was what was in their mind. They weren't asking about the end of the planet. That's what we ask. But that's not what that's told. That's not what that's talking about. It might be a good time to let y'all know, you may have heard of something called a preterist. Who raise your hand if you know what a preterist is. Have y'all ever heard of that term? I am not a preterist. Just letting y'all know. Preterist does not believe any prophecy fulfillment can happen past 70 AD. No books of the Bible were written past 70 AD. Nothing can happen past, no fulfillment can happen past that. I do not believe that at all. There's multiple things I believe that happen after 70 AD. I use 1 Corinthians 15:24 as the opposite of Revelation 21:2. Some of you have heard me talk about that before. In my Revelation class, you should have remembered that. I think 1 Corinthians 15:24 is talking about the end of time. Okay? I don't know if I'm right, but that's currently what I believe. Well, there you have the kingdom being delivered up. Revelation 21, you have the kingdom coming down. They're doing the opposite thing. It's one of the ways in which I proved that Revelation is not about the end of time. So, some people will hear me say, oh, you think Revelation is about the destruction of Jerusalem, you're a preterist. I'm like, I'm not a preterist. I didn't even know what a preterist was until about 10 years ago. I didn't, and I've been studying this stuff since I was 15. It wasn't until my brother was teaching it at another congregation, and he got in some hot water, and they accused him of being a Max King follower. And we said, and he came to me, he's like, who's Max King? I was like, I have no idea who's Max King. We had to go look up Max King. Max King is some preterist. We're like, we don't know who that is. So I am not, my brothers, we're not preterist.
Are you going to make me Google this word that you keep using?
It's P-R-A-E-T.
P-R-E-T.
A-E.
A-E-T?
Yeah, it's
Praetor?
It's a weird.
Preterism?
It's a weird spin on a Greek term. It's
I don't know, I'm not a preterist, I don't know what it means.
What is it?
P-R-A-E-T-E-R.
I didn't know the A was in there, but I can't spell wash, so that's not bad.
Is that kind of like the,
Put an R in it. Got a 95. It's the
Praetorium-
first time ever in school I missed a question.
Is it spelled like
Quit spelling after
Praetorian
that.
Guard or something? The way he's spelling it.
That's the way he sounds like he's
I
spelling.
know.
In Google, they just have a plain old E.
P-R-E-T. That's the way I spell it. But never use me as a source for spelling. Am I right, Julie? Julie's back there. Yeah, do not do that. So I felt like I needed to let y'all know so that y'all are out and don't tell y'all come listen to this preterist talk. No. And if you remember my Daniel class as well, if you were in my Daniel class, you remember that when we got to the 1335, the 1290 and the 1335, preterists have no answer for that. I say that the 1335 is from the destruction of Jerusalem from the temple until the fall of Messiah. That's exactly 1335 days, or the day after the first day of peace is the 1335. That alone right there rules me out from being a preterist. Okay? 5-minute sidetrack that probably shouldn't have had gone into.
So here's an interesting question about, so we're talking about preterists, we're talking about prophecy, right? Prophecy fulfillment. The passages that we're looking at, Isaiah, Joel, all these other ones, they're absolutely certain prophecies, although they're a little bit veiled, right? But they're certain. It's like this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And this is one of those things that sometimes causes people to start thinking that, oh, well, God has sort of dictated our path and that, you know, we're just following orders from the divine and sort of like a robot or something like that, right? There's this free will versus like sovereignty of God kind of contest. But I want to point something out. There's a timing difference in the prophecies that we're talking about. If you go back to like Deuteronomy 32, there's a bunch of conditional if statements. If you keep my commands, if you do this, if you do this, if you do this, the kingdom would stay forever. So if you go before that moment in time, the prophecies are not like locked in about this is going to happen. It's like this could happen, right? But now that we're past the point of judgment, right? The prophecies now are God making a statement about what's going to happen because of the sin they've already committed. So it looks certain in a way that sort of looks programmatic, but it's a consequence of the condition that was set earlier in when they were coming out of slavery.
Maybe along those lines is you can kind of see the progression of the prophecies. You get in, I want to say in Exodus, middle of Exodus, something like that, you get your first thinly veiled reference to Christ. That's the first, not counting Genesis.
Yeah.
That is the first like prophecy of Christ coming. And you progressively start getting more and more aggressive with these prophets, the major prophets, the minor prophets, as they come along. You start seeing it a lot more. And these guys don't start showing up really until 8th century, 7th century, 6th century. So it's, the Jews are 700-800 years old by then, as their own nation, and the world was much older. Maybe related, maybe not, I don't know.
It's just an interesting observation on prophecy early in the Old Testament versus prophecy later in the Old Testament. They fall into kind of two different categories. One's conditional prophecy, and one becomes very, very certain because judgment's already set.
Yeah, I think you had that with the last couple of Kings as well.
Mhm.
I think you see it there. He locks it in because of guys like Ahaz.
Which means that we made our own choices, and we, in this moment
We
of
have
time-
free will.
Yeah.
We have free will. Yeah. Isaiah 6, we may or may not get to 7. We're not going to be in this much, but this is one of those ones where he's directly quoting Isaiah, saying, hey, this is being fulfilled right now. Gives you some explanation of what it is. Isaiah 6:8, who shall I send? Here am I, send me. Everybody's familiar with that phrase. But then he says, what is he going to be sent to do? He says, go tell this people, hear ye indeed, but understand not. This is the Acts version. See ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, wax gross. and their ears heavy, and their eyes closed, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and convert, the transition from Judaism to Christianity, and be healed. Because the Son of Righteousness was there with healing in his wings. Malachi 4:2. Paul is saying that Isaiah prophecy is being fulfilled right then. Be it known therefore unto you that the salvation of God is sent unto the Gentiles. This is your big clue. The nations from afar would join the kingdom. This is a first century event. It cannot happen before then. It cannot. It's, yes, going into Babylonian captivity and coming out of it, all that, that's a prefigure, a foreshadowing event. But that's not the point. They will hear it. The Gentiles are going to be receptive to it. And when he had said these words, the Jews departed and had great reasoning among themselves. These two verses, they are repeated over and over in the New Testament. Isaiah is the Messianic prophet. Isaiah is ultimately talking about things that would happen in the last days of the Jews, there in the first century, when Christ would come, shake the heavens and earth, and replace it with that mountain which could not be moved. Isaiah, so right after this happens, he's saying, how long do I do this? He said, we're going to be sending this message out until the place is wasted without inhabitants, until the land is utterly desolate. We're going to have a small, he's talking about the remnant here in verse 13. The remnant, the ones that convert, they're going to be the holy seed. They're going to be the stuff that remains. They're going to be the good stuff. Paul is saying that Acts chapter 6, Paul is saying at the end of Acts that Isaiah chapter 6 was a first century event being fulfilled. I think I can cover this. I've got 10 minutes. Let me do chapter 7, because there's only one thing that we're going to talk about here. Isaiah 7, verse 14. I'm going to let y'all guess. You already started laughing.
Yeah.
Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son and call his name Emmanuel. And I highlighted it in green, because y'all weren't going to get it if I didn't highlight it in green.
What does that mean?
Wow. First century event, right? Christ is coming. Now, here's the thing. When you get into chapter 7, there's actually controversy behind this. When I was reading, I didn't know there was. I had to go start reading all these commentaries to make sure I bring y'all everything, what other people are saying as well. There's actually controversy about this. I was like, no way. I talked to my brother. I'm like, what? Listen to what these people say. And he's like, he told me how to deal with it easily. But what's going on is you've got, I think somewhere in Syria, Arman or Pekah and Rezin, these two kings of the north. They're going to be up in this area. And they're not happy with Jerusalem. They want to come down. They want to desolate it. They want to put up their own prince in its place, their own puppet king or whatever. They're going to destroy Ahaz and all of them. Ahaz is freaking out about it. Isaiah is told, hey, take your newborn son and go to this meeting. Go to the pool that I think that's the one Hezekiah creates when they were under siege. Go there, you're going to meet with Ahaz and say these things. Ahaz is like, oh, we're being destroyed, we're gone, we're done for, man. We're done for. And he says, no. Ask for a sign. Ahaz, who's not the greatest guy in the world, let's face it. He's like, no, I don't want to tempt the Lord. Oh, he's a bad dude. He's locked in with the Assyrians. Isaiah says, you're not asking for a sign, but I'm going to give you a sign anyway. You're not going to be destroyed. Because Christ has to come into the world first. There's going to be a virgin is going to conceive and bear a son and call his name Emmanuel. That has to happen before you are destroyed. And then he says, you see my son here, my infant son? Before he's old enough to discern right from wrong, Pekah and Rezin are going to be wiped out. They're both killed shortly thereafter. God takes care of them. Because they were coming in to attack God's people. And it wasn't part of the plan, and so God handles them. That's what he's saying. When you read it, and I think the translation that I found the easiest to understand, because it's all joined together. It says, hey, there's going to be a virgin conceive, and when this child is, before he's 3 years old, these two kings that you hate are going to be killed. When you read it like that, it's like you get confused. If you read the Young's literal translation, I thought that was the best one. It says, and this youth, before this youth is 3, kind of switching over from Christ to Isaiah's own son, who has a different name. He's named in there. And you go through all of this debate and trouble, probably coming from Jews themselves today who do not want this verse to be about Christ. So they start going after the word virgin. That's where the controversy lies. And I was talking to Tom about it earlier, and there's not really a word for virgin in that language. And so
modify that. There is a word for virgin. I wouldn't look it up since we talked about it. So
okay.
There's 2 Hebrew words. There's Alma and Betula, and basically he uses the wrong one. But the point is that one of them is dual purpose. So like, if you remember last week when I was talking about the woman and wife could be the what is what.
This is you and me talking. Yeah.
There's let's just say this: the both Hebrew and Greek, the language for woman versus wife is a little bit underdeterministic. So sometimes you'll see, like in Greek, for example, the word for young woman and the word for wife is the same word, and you have to use context to figure out which one it is. So there's a similar sort of thing that goes on with Hebrew, where there's kind of this. There's woman, and then there's young woman, and then there's virgin, and there's some overlap between the words. They're a little bit underdeterministic. Part of the point that's being made here in the controversy is that, they should have used the other word.
What was the other one?
The Hebrew words I think were Alma and Betula.
Alma and Betula?
I think. It's been a while still. But the point is that whatever the word is, whether it's a young woman shall conceive or whether it's a virgin shall conceive, either of those could be true in Isaiah. It's cleared up in Matthew.
Yeah, don't steal it. I knew you were going to do that.
He hates it when you do that.
Sorry.
So, all of that stuff, right? When people start getting into the original languages, sometimes I listen, sometimes I don't. Most of you in here, I'm hoping you're like, man, you start getting that technical. There's got to be an easier way. Well, there is. There's a much easier way to figure this out. Y'all ever read Matthew chapter 1?
Pretty easy there.
Right? Let's forget all of that nonsense that I'm not interested in. She will give birth to a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Now all this took place so that which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet would be fulfilled. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and give birth to a son and call his name Emmanuel, which translates God with us. And Joseph awoke from his sleep and did as the angel of the Lord commanded and took Mary as his wife, but he kept her a virgin until she gave birth to a son, and they named him Jesus. Okay? Relax on all that controversy. It's just people that are really, really trying hard for Christ to not be the Messiah, right? This doesn't line up with any other verse. This is it. So you can rest easy. You are at the right place. You do have the right religion. Keep coming.
It's true.
I sometimes wonder, who's that for? The virgin shall conceive? Honestly, who knows?
It's for ants. No, I'm kidding.
No, I mean, like I sometimes wonder, I mean, it's there in the text and so we can trust it and stuff like that, but it's like, at the time that this is given, is it for Mary? Like, who else would know? Like, Joseph thought she cheated on him, he was gonna, until an angel came to him, so maybe Joseph knows. The rest of the people, nah, so she cheated. Like, why would they think anything?
Maybe what Joseph has to go through kind
Yeah, the point
of
is,
confirms it for everybody.
like, we take this as a significant statement for Christianity at large.
Yeah.
Fulfillment at large.
It's a big
It might have just been for the two of them. Hey, we're raising a Messiah. Think you ought to know?
Yeah.
Was right, she knew for sure.
Yeah.
She had no doubt. Anyway, Holy Spirit confirms it. Isaiah is talking about Christ. And you're going to get peppered with Christ over these next several chapters. You will see a lot of green highlight. There are a lot of quotes. This is the Messianic Prophet. Isaiah is talking about Christ coming and switching over the world to Christianity so the Gentiles can be a part of it.